Hello.
Well,
Hey. Right. Is the ceiling yellow too?
no.
Wow, that was going to be a very yellow room.
Nope, just the walls.
Yellow's a happy color.
It is.
Hi, Jaden. All right, let's just give a couple more minutes maybe for Ashley to come in. And you all signed up for next? Oh, no, we're doing that next week. I was going to go into all ready for classes last semester, right?
Yes.
Jaden, this is your last semester as well.
Yeah.
Can I ask you where you're going after?
I don't know. I've been looking at Thomas. I'm not really sure though. I'm not sure if I want to transfer over to one of their programs there or if I want to get more classes done at KV.
Yep. If you change over to the liberal studies program, it gives you a lot of flexibility to kind of like knock off a whole bunch of extra requirements and stuff like that at the cost of KV. It's a little bit more expensive to go to Thomas.
Yeah.
It's one of the most expensive schools in Maine.
Yeah.
Right up there with Bates and Colby.
I don't know. I just don't know what else I'd need to take, so I probably should meet with you to talk about that because I haven't really. I don't know.
Well, next week, the schedule is going to be released, and we go into the pre-registration season shortly after that. And that would be, we should maybe take some time in this class, kind of make sure everybody's, go through your schedule and make sure you got everything to graduate, and then have that discussion about, what's next. The thing I would want to, and we can talk about this obviously later, but the thing I would want to know, I don't think it really makes a difference. And that is, in the past, I have encountered a couple instances in which students who have graduated from the psychology program at Thomas have had some difficulty getting into APA accredited graduate schools because Thomas's psychology program is not accredited. That may be different now. They may have done that. That might be fine. So it's just a question to throw out there, particularly if you're interested in going into graduate school. Whereas, to tell you the truth, the graduate, even though we are accredited here at KV, the psych program is accredited, they don't care. Graduate schools don't care about us, but they do care about your bachelor's degree, about where you go to get that. And I don't know if it's an issue but it's just one of those rumors that have come out about that particular program. And for a significant amount of time during that period, there were actually, and this is why, they had no full-time psychologists on their staff. The person that was running the psych program had a master's of divinity and a profound interest and knowledge in psychology. There's no doubt people got a good education, but there was that technicality of individuals didn't have the right letters. And so just something to keep in mind there as you're looking for that next step. What about you, Jordan? What's your?
I'm not really sure. I've been thinking about UMA,
Yep.
but I haven't really looked at other options.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with UMA has a lot of options that you could take from here. You could go into
Mhm.
mental health
Yeah.
there, but then there would be that serious question like Jaden was just talking about is can I stay at KV for a while
Right.
and take the mental health program, go from this program to the mental health program? You'd go to UMA and you'd just have about a year left
Yeah.
of their
Yeah, that'd be
program.
cool.
But they also have a social sciences program, and I'm on the advisory board for that particular program down at UMA. And that's a very unique, interesting program if you were going to go into non-clinical applications. The it's actually a really cool, very unique degree. They do not have a psychology degree there. They have the social sciences one, but it's sort of pragmatic. One of the discussions we had when the program was being laid out was that individuals coming out of that program would be well equipped to be the researchers in grants, for writing grants, for doing the statistics for grants. And that is an incredibly lucrative line of work. And so it's obviously not, it's very different than dealing with people or doing clinical work or anything like that, but it has sort of that slant to it. And the graduates, I've met 3 or 4 graduates. Every single graduate is the CEO of their own company right now. And maybe those are the ones that volunteer to talk to advisory boards. I mean, that might be the difference there, but it was an interesting trend. They all worked for themselves. They found their own thing, probably because they couldn't find a job that was specific that, kind of thing. Might as well create my own. But cool. Now that said, there are programs all over the state. Every single University of Maine, with the exception of UMA, has a degree in psychology. And even before COVID, University of Maine and Presque Isle did their psych program online. And if you were at all interested in that program, we actually have one of our employees that works for our continuing education or our business and industry, Melissa, graduated from here with liberal studies, went to Presque Isle and finished her degree in psychology completely online and had a great experience. And so that was one thing there. Well, there's my wisdom of the day. Goodbye. No. Okay, let's get started here. Our Ashleys may not be showing up, but we are in Thanksgiving season, heading toward Thanksgiving here. So let's talk about internal regulation like hunger and thirst and those kinds of things. So I will, whoops, I'm not going to chat. I'm going to share my screen. So here we are in chapter 10, internal regulation. And of course, the psychology of hunger is really just a little piece of the larger world of motivation and the little corner of motivation that we call drives, where motivation, or the internal representations of things we desire, interface with our biology and create the set of drives that we have. So we know that we have a hunger drive. And I don't mean raising money for food. I mean, we have a drive to eat. We have a sex drive. We have, we don't necessarily call them drives, but we have thirst, and we have other aspects, like say when we have to go to the bathroom and the initiation of those behaviors to do that. And what we have to recognize is all of these, even though they have a profound biological component to them, and we're going to see that here, we're really talking a lot about food chemistry and homeostasis and all the stuff that you'd get from a biology class. Everything has to go through that brain. So ultimately, even though the base motivation may be a drive, like I need to put things into my body that allow me to metabolize sugars to drive my energy and to get other materials and raw materials for building up cells and all this is purely animal type quality to this. We know that it gets deeply embedded into psychology because I don't like olives, you know? And so what is it about that? What is it about olives that even though that's in all actuality, it's a whole food. It has all of the amino acids. It's almost a perfect food right up there with like the melons and stuff like you could actually live on it. Not well, but there's a lot in olives. I'll starve to death on the island before I crack open that jar of olives. So not likely, but anyway, I would not enjoy life being just olives. So there's a psychology in it, and certainly when we look at when we look at drinks and foods, those have become not only ways of sustaining our life, but they've become art forms. A bartender that knows how to concoct different flavors together to give a unique flavor. People who mix juices and those kinds of things, what we do with all the different sodas that we have, all of that, that industry to give us a wide range. There is no other animal that drinks anything but water. Every other animal, that's all they drink is water. We, on the other hand, have an almost limitless supply of different options, and let alone getting into food and the cultural aspects of food. So it's all psychology is still there, even though we're meeting that, and at the most base level, we're meeting that fundamental need as an animal. So we are the beings that have issues. Some of us have a lot of issues. And people have issues with food. We have unhealthy relationships with food. And I have to tell you, this class is coming today. Leading up to this, I was just, my wife and my daughter, they're here, and we just had this huge conversation about what I'm going to be talking about today and how it relates to obesity, how it relates to anorexia, messages from our society about what's good to eat and what's not good to eat and how that changes, the history of the egg in America, which is it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, that whole science circle that's going on. And then ultimately where I'm hoping our discussion is going to land is talking a little bit about how the brain uses signals from the body to manage our sense of being hungry, that then initiates this complex set of behaviors that we call eating. For one set of people means I need to go out in the forest and find things to eat, or I need to hunt something down and prepare it. And for other people, they go to the grocery store and collect a whole bunch of ingredients, put them together in unique ways, add spices from all over the world in order to produce the same net effect of giving nutrition to the body, that complexity that comes after that. So the beginning starts off with eating disorders and getting a little bit on there, and there's some statistics related to that. Eating disorders is largely, they don't refer to them as these, but as enamored as we may be with the term pandemic, obesity is a pandemic, technically speaking. It's that, in some areas, obesity and anorexia have been considered to be more almost to the point of a epidemic. So, and that means how fast it's growing. That's what those terms refer to. And pandemic, the word demic means the demographics of how fast. Pan means between different nations. Epidemic is a degree. Epi, I mean, if it like the, I almost feel the term meaning a lot. like epidemic would be, it's progressing a lot. So those are actually, epidemics don't turn into pandemics. Pandemics don't turn into epidemics. Epidemics is the rate of which a disease is growing. Pandemic means the disease is growing all over the world, even if it's growing at low rates. That's why, even if only a few people were happening, but if the disease is happening in every country, it's considered a pandemic. And eating disorders are a pandemic. They're a global issue, particularly in the United States. So we go into what we're looking at is fundamentally this first term that comes here, which homeostasis, which means the balance, keeping things even, keeping things the same, that we have mechanisms in our body, both automated and the result of our cognition, that help us to keep things in balance. That we respond to the environmental influences around us, including the internal environment. When I'm feeling the sensations, let's say, of my belly being empty, that initiates a drive in my brain at the lower levels of my brain related to hunger, but then they eventually translate to my cortex to, should I have chips and cheese again? Or should I have a glass of water? Or should I have sliced cucumbers? There's going to be some sort of decision mechanism that's there for me to equal out that balance that ultimately started physiologically. And the first one that's there is temperature. So we have a temperature regulation system. And so that the distribution of blood, the movement of our muscles, the burning, literally in the very figurative sense, not with an open flame, but calories burn. The sugar actually goes through the chemical transition as if wood was burning. It moves from a complex carbohydrate molecule and it's broken down into lots of carbon-based molecules, which, if you laid them out, look like charcoal, just like when something is burning. So when we just do it differently internal, but that produces, every time you break those bonds, it produces heat. And our body uses its energy stores to distribute heat throughout the body, as well as through the blood system distributing, simply because the blood moves from an internal, very warm organ to an external, very relatively cold organ, your skin, and helps keep us warm. When that balance in it, like say in my office here, which is above my garage, which is not, let's just say it's not perfectly insulated. When I came up here this morning, getting ready for my day, up until this morning, the upstairs, there's a loft, and the upstairs window I had open. Now there's cold enough in here for me to shiver. Now shivering, when externally, when we're cold and our blood supply and our using up of energy is not up to the task, the brain sends signals to the muscles just underneath our skin to start shaking. And the motion of those, just as if you were going like I'm squeezing my fist here, I'm going like that. And if you do that for a while, you're actually going to start feeling your hand warm up. More blood flow, using up of energy, it's going there. When you shiver, those muscles are responding very, very quickly in an effort to release heat to warm up your body. So when you're shivering, you're actually trying to warm up. It's not like a response to being cold. Well, it is a response to being cold, but it's not, the cold doesn't make us shiver. It's our response to cold that makes us shiver. We're trying to get warmed up again. People who have suffered from hypothermia, it actually, when that system, what they eventually experience is it goes away. When you have hypothermia and the shivering response goes away, And that's when some serious consequences can start happening. So we use our, it's as it says right there, 2/3 of our energy that we consume is just maintaining our body temperature. And when we say that we're fighting off a cold, we're probably using more than 2/3 of our energy in order to raise our body temperature, which is our immune response to create an environment that's hostile to bacteria. So if we get a fever, we increase our temperature, our basal temperature of our body, and the bacteria, like it's being boiled away, like when we boil water to make it good to drink, we're increasing the temperature. However, that increase of temperature is also problematic. It can also kill healthy cells. If it gets too high and it's maintained too high. So that's why, it's sort of, we don't only want the temperature to go down, we want the bacterial infection to go down. The temperature of our fever indicates that we have an infection. If our doctor then chooses to give us an antibacterial medication or something, we'll take that and hopefully our fever will break. Our body will return to its normal basal temperature. If it doesn't, we may experience some problems because our immune system is overacting. And so, that's how our temperature system works. That's shivering, it's the brain, and that's brain. That's brain. All the cold-blooded animals, and what we mean by that is their basal temperature is not internally regulated; it's externally regulated. They adapt to the environment, what it is. And oftentimes, say amphibians like frogs and snails and whatnot will actually go into a state of hibernation, and their body metabolism will slow down so much that it's equitable. They're burying themselves in the ground below the permafrost and be able to exist and continue to live very, very low level, low energy needs and whatnot until the area warms up, and then they can come back out. And which is why we here in Maine don't have a whole lot of snakes. They don't like the cold. Okay, and I put a little bit in there, just kind of like going through my book here, the brain freeze part. There's a little explanation of that. Just a little factoid that our brain does not have pain receptors in it. So our brain our thoughts are sometimes painful, and sometimes what we hear other people say is painful, but our brain itself does not feel anything. So in brain surgery, if we're awake, which we often are, it's another story, but when people are doing brain surgery, most of the time the patient is kept awake, and it helps the physician to recognize. They actually stimulate parts of the brain as part of mapping where they're going to do surgery. And so as they stimulate parts of the brain, the patient can tell what they're feeling. Like, oh, I'm feeling a warm sensation down my right side. And the doctor's like, okay, I know where I am now on the surface of the brain. So kind of weird to think that you're sitting there in the halo, somebody's, you're part of your skull's away, and they're saying, hey, how's it going? But on the external surface, in the meningeal layers of our, outside of our brain, there's a tough tissue membrane that exists. It's a sac that surrounds our brain, is loaded with blood vessels and loaded with neurons, both to control the dilation of those blood vessels and to indicate pain. And who's had a headache? Everybody's had a headache. And so a headache is almost aside from bacterial infection, which actually produces the same, it's inflammation of the meningeal layers. That's the technical term for a headache. There's just too much blood rushing to your head. And the distended blood vessels are pressing up against those pain neurons and sending signals down. So when we get brain freeze, there's vessels right underneath our right on top of our soft palate, and as cold fluids or that ice cream or that ice cube goes down, it causes those blood vessels to dilate, and we get that pain going up into our head. It's also, now I've thrown this out there for a couple people, and there's a couple people said it worked really, really well, and there's a couple people that said it had no effect at all. But do either one of you experience migraines? And devastating headaches, and again, the same thing. It's the pounding that you hear, is actually your heartbeat. Your pain starts to coordinate with your heartbeat as all these blood vessels are totally engorged with blood. Bright light causes your facial muscles to constrict, so the light itself bothers you. Loud sounds, all of these things, of course, very distressful for a person who's having a migraine. It was recommended to me by an osteopathic doctor after I had experienced my first migraine, was to fill a tub, or a bucket or something like that, but fill the tub with as hot water as you can possibly imagine, and put a chair straddling the top of the tub and put your feet in the water. His notion was that, and this is like almost to the point that you can't stand it. Now, if you put your water, and don't burn yourself, obviously, but if you put your feet in water and they get all red, part of that redness, in fact, all of that redness, is because blood is being sent to that area to try and cool down that area, try and circulate. So your skin turns red. Aside from burning, that's a different, your skin turns red. But it was incredibly successful for me to do that, because when I put my feet into the water, that metabolism part of me that we're talking, that homeostasis part of me said, we need blood at the feet. And it started sending blood to the feet, less blood to my brain. And my migraine symptoms wouldn't necessarily go away, but they would certainly, I would experience relief. Plus, there's nothing really bad about having your feet soaking in hot water anyway, which is kind of cool. And this is why I suspect that when I'm on the beach and I'm sticking my feet into hot sand, I don't think about school stuff. In fact, I don't think about very much. And might be because of that. No more blood in my brain. Okay. Then there's here a little bit about thirst. I'm having too much fun listening to myself talk here. I gotta move on to thirst. Here we have different kinds of thirst that we have when we drink salty food, and when you drink when we eat salty food and whatnot. Be advised that fast food restaurants do not make a whole lot of money on food. They make a lot of money on soda. The profit margin for an average McDonald's hamburger is probably about 20 cents. So for every hamburger that they make 20 cents, something like that. The profit margin on a soda is so high that they came to the conclusion that all you need to do is buy one, and they've already made so much money that they'll just let you give yourself the rest. And that's why they translated over to self-serve sodas. So you eat the very, very, very salty food, and you drink the soda. And if you get you get a drink, and I think it's almost like 98.6% of the cost of the soda is profit, because soda to buy as a restaurant is so cheap. It's just, basically they make it there, right? So they have the soda water under pressure. that they buy for pennies, and they just buy the syrup. And then they have a machine that mixes those together. And the amount of syrup in a glass like that is minuscule, super sweet syrup. So they make a lot of money on that. So salty food makes you thirsty, and that's essentially the basis of the fast food market. Let's give you lots of salty food and you'll drink a lot. And it's also why many bars will tell you that the fastest flying drinks are the margaritas. The margaritas are highly salt. The more salty, I mean, there are sweet drinks, but really the salty ones are the ones that sell the best. So we have margaritas, and of course, beer, which has a huge amount of salt in it. And so those, they don't make you less thirsty. They actually make you more thirsty. And so hence we drink a lot. Has anybody, and just last little piece things here, because I sometimes just throw trivia in here. People know about Gatorade? People know the origin of that? No? Anybody? Gatorade?
Well, I know like the whole electrolyte thing, but like I'm reading this and I didn't know they were salts.
Well, yeah, that's what electrolytes are.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Salts, yeah. And but the Gatorade is from the University of Florida Gators, the football team. Yeah, and this is a long time ago. The University of Florida, I think it's University of Florida, University of South Florida, one of those. One of you will look it up. It'd be like the University of Tallahassee, and I think it's in Florida. It's a college in Florida, and they were called the Gators was the name of them. And one of the biology instructors came up with this concoction on request from the football coach for something that his players can drink in the hot weather, because when we're sweating, part of, like, if you think about when you're sweating, which is your, again, homeostasis, you're exercising, or you're out in the heat and you're moving around and your muscles are moving around, and your body takes fluid from inside of you, excretes it through the pores, and it evaporates into the atmosphere. Evaporation is a chemical change that causes bonds. The water breaks up and bonds with molecules in the sky, in the air, and therefore when that bond happens, there's a release, energy is taken out of the system, and it creates that bond. So we get that cooling effect, a little chemistry in there. You know, when we're sweating, that's why we feel cool on our temperature. It's also while humidity plays in there, just to throw that out there. When the air is dense with water already, that what we would call high humidity, then evaporation is inhibited. And that's why when we sweat, when it's high humidity, why we don't feel cooled off. But if we put ourselves in front of a fan and we increase the airflow around us, or we start running, we can get that cooling effect. But if we just stand there in high humidity, we don't sweat, or we sweat, but it just sits on our skin, and you get that sticky feeling. So when it's sticky sweat, when it's sticky outside, that what you're actually feeling is the salt drying on your skin. If you actually, sweat tastes salty. It has a lot of electrolytes in it. So back to Florida, we have so the coach goes over to the biology department, or maybe the nutrition department or whatever, and says, can you create something here? We live in a state, high humidity. People are excreting not only are they sweating their fluids out, so they need water, but they also need to replace those electrolytes. They need the salt. And I'll tell you why in just a little minute. We need that salt to also maintain ourselves. So they came up with Gatorade. And they were the only ones that had it. And it became a performance enhancement for that team. They won more games. They did. And then of course I think the school sold it, but then they still own a little piece of it because they own the name or something like that. It's now, of course, its own corporation and whatnot. But that's how it got its start, was a fluid that we can drink that would not only, water, when we're working out and we're losing not only fluids, but we're also losing our the salts in our blood system. We need more than water. We need something with salt in it. We need electrolytes. So if you're ever dealing with like children, there's when children whose systems are not quite as well adapted for regulation are particularly sensitive to dehydration under two conditions. First, if you leave them in a car. That's why you and I left in a car all day would probably survive. And as we have tragically seen, small children left in a car all day have passed away. Their bodies simply, well, we would probably break a window, but the children, their bodies simply do not have the kind of mechanism to deal with that as well. But more common, and obviously something almost every parent has to deal with, if a kid is throwing up or has diarrhea in response to a bacterial infection, particularly an gastrointestinal infection. The intestine is absorbing too much. The fluid is not being absorbed. It's bringing fluid in to push things out, but it's all the large intestines, I hope you might know, is supposed to be what turns your loose poop into hard poop. It takes that's the technical way to describe that. Just me, the scientist. Sorry, if these words go above your head, just ride with it. So your soft poop to hard poop, because your large intestine is dehydrating it. When you have an intestinal infection, it doesn't have that ability. So we're losing fluids, and you probably have heard of Pedialyte. Now, Pedialyte is a play on the word electrolyte. So Pedialyte for children, is a highly salty, it doesn't taste salty, it tastes more sweet because of the way they make it. But it has a lot of electrolytes in it, and it helps children to not only gain their fluids back, but also get the electrolytes they need. Now, why do we need so much salt? Anybody want to take a guess?
Oh, are you asking? I thought you were going to say.
Yeah, that's actually a real question.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I thought salt was bad for you.
Anybody? I'm going to show you another page in our course book. Comes full circle here. Okay, way back here. And we have the sodium potassium pump in our nerve cells. Let's see what the next is there. Right here, let's look at the I'm way at the beginning of our book here. When we look at, I think it's only there in your textbook. I'm sorry for my scanning here. Sodium ions are important in neuron transmission. When there's an electrical potential that's building up in a neuron, it opens up sodium channels. The sodium channels allow that sodium ion to come in. What is sodium? What's another name? Salt. But it's actually sodium chloride, NaCl2, or baking soda, there'd be sodium bicarbonate, are two very commonly known. So table salt is NaCl, sodium chloride. And The other one, interestingly enough, have you ever heard of lithium? Lithium is another salt. In fact, in the southern hemisphere, so nations like Oceania, South America, Australia, and what while we have sodium chloride or salt mines, they have lithium mines. And table salt, if you happen to be having a little shrimp on the barbie down in Australia and you ask for salt, probably getting lithium, which is fine. But that's probably why they're so laid back down there. You know, they have I'm being a little facetious there, but I'm scrolling in our book way back to where we were here. What chapter are we in? Okay, I got it. I'm there. Okay. So we talked a little bit about salts, about how important that is. Not only we have fluids when we sweat, when we have diarrhea, when we throw up, all those things, they threaten our lives, because if we lose all of this fluid, we become dehydrated and we have the results of that. But when we also lose all of these salts, we have overconcentration of those, and our nervous system doesn't work very well either. And individuals who are trapped on that deserted island or out in that boat die of a heart attack when their nervous system can no longer sustain the neuron impulses. Part of that homeostasis also keeps us. There was a great riddle when I was in high school. There was a person was in the middle. They're in, what did they say? An individual dies of thirst surrounded by water. And we had to solve that. And the riddle was that he was in the ocean. And although there's plenty of water, H2O, in seawater, there's also a lot of other things, including microorganisms, but also sodium. And so there's salt water. And when we ingest salt water, what actually happens is, I should have hooked up my iPad because this is a kind of a drawing. You have our cell, and our cell has a balance of sodium, water to it. And the external part of the cell, the intercellular tissue or the intercellular space, is full of fluid that has a balance of, a balance between sodium and water. When we increase the salinity of the external cellular pressure, the external cellular tissue, if we would drink salt water, it would increase the salinity of the external to the cell. And what would happen is the fluid inside of the cell would start through a process, not mitosis. You know what that is? Capillary action, not capillary action, but there's a seeping of the fluid inside the cell to the external part of the cell to help balance both sides of the cell wall so that one is not more salty than the other. So as we continue to drink salt water, our cells begin to shrivel until they die. And so that's why it's really not a good idea to be drinking salt water. Now that's different than drinking water when you're in a position where you have it's not like Pedialyte. The ocean is not full of Pedialyte. It's not like, oh, I'm working out, I'm going to go have some salt water because it has salt in it. No, it has way too much salt in it, whereas Gatorade has much less. Okay. All right. Now we look at hunger. This is where I want to kind of finish off our discussion today, because hunger is a pretty complex system that involves different aspects of the brain being triggered by external signals coming from different parts of our body. And this is kind of like what I want to kind of do, skip over the glucose stuff here and go right into the graphic. Essentially what we see here is the bioneurological process by which we experience hunger and which produces the drive either to engage in food-seeking behavior, whatever it happens to be, kind of talked about the complexity of that at the beginning, or to stop eating. And these, of course, these are very vital when we're looking at, let's go way back to the beginning of the class, and we talk about the pandemic and essentially almost epidemic rate of obesity in Maine, in the United States. There's a problem with our hunger motives and our satiation motives, and those being out of balance. And some of them are behavioral, some are purely behavioral, but oftentimes we'll find the solutions to these problems hidden in the biochemistry and how it interacts with the brain. And so we'll touch on some of those psychological components as we make our way through understanding this graph that's in front of us. And if you look on the left-hand side of this graph, you'll see these are the sources of information that the brain uses to decide whether or not it's going to engage in food-seeking behavior. In fact, I'm sorry, that it's going to create the drive that our brain then interprets as, I need to get something to eat. So here we have the hunger signal that is produced by a chemical called ghrelin that's released during food deprivation. It's coming from the different parts of the body saying we don't have enough energy to continue doing what we're doing, and therefore that chemical is released. We have the taste input coming from our nose and mouth area, all of those sensations sending signals to our brain. No, you've probably all experienced going through a period of time when you haven't eaten, and then you start getting hungry. So that's the experience of the ghrelin. You've all probably, out of nowhere, you're doing fine, and then you're driving along and you go by a pizza place and the pizza smell and you're like, wow, I'm hungry. Because the smell and the taste, which are intricately related, send a signal. So that's a source of information here. And then we have this sort of long-term signal that we get from leptin, which is produced by the amount of body fat that we have in our bodies. We all have a certain amount of body fat, and it's sort of a mechanism here. And you'll see when I talk about these individually, that's sort of in the middle for a reason, because that signal can tell us go eat, or it can tell us don't eat, that point. And then we look at insulin and the presence or absence of insulin telling us as to how we are metabolizing the sugars in our body. And then we have the distension of the stomach, how full the actual stomach feels. And that's another signal that goes. Oh, and one more, it's underneath there. Sorry, I didn't go all the way around the circle here. We have glucose, which is the actual consumption of sweet stuff that sends a signal. And then what I want to you have all these external, internal, let's call them just environmental signals coming in, and they're affecting two separate cells, two different kinds of cells that are present in the hypothalamus, which is the hunger center. Some of those cells are going to tell the body, you have a hunger and you need to go do something about it. The hunger drive, or let's call them hunger motives, as I did on this. And then another set of cells are going to say, no, you're all set. Now, this mechanism, this produces the drive as to whether this is biologically. Now, of course, cognitively, we're going to have to engage in this and figure out, you know, what am I going to do about it? But here we have chemicals reduced into our bloodstream and affecting our hypothalamus that tell us that we need food because we're running out of energy. Neuron impulses coming from our gastric, you know, our mouths and throats and noses and sinus cavities and stuff that are talking about food that can either they can produce hunger, but they also can maybe have a negative effect. If you smell something really rotten, you know, it can ruin your appetite, kind of thing. Then you have body fat producing leptin that is a balancing, sort of a homeostasis signal there. And then the presence of insulin and how it's metabolizing the sugar, distension of our stomach, and the presence of ready available sugars, which is going to be kind of the point I'm going to make today about that readily available sugars, which is the point of the discussion I was having with my family just moments ago. So we have this information coming in, some of which affect the hunger motive, make us more hungry. Others affect that satiety motive, and that's going to be make us less hungry. And you know, who wins? Who wins in the end? These messages are coming in all the time. So part of our hypothalamus is trying to tell us that we're hungry, and part of our hypothalamus is trying to tell us that we're not hungry. Now, I want to point to one interesting little caveat to this, and this little built-in safety mechanism in our brain. If you look at the hunger motive and you look at the pathway is very simplified, just as a red line, and you see NPY, AGRP, and GABA. These are neurotransmitters that are released by the hypothalamus on the way to the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus, where we make the decision. What I want you to recognize is the little safety valve in there, that when we have an overproduction of these particular chemicals in the pathway that normally would activate hunger, some of them actually activate satiation. So there's a limit to this. There's a limiting factor to the part of our hypothalamus that says you're hungry, to make sure that we don't get too, or at least we don't have the sensation that we're too hungry, because as it's pushing out those chemicals to the paraventricular nucleus, it's also sending them to the inhibitory part of the hypothalamus, saying you're not hungry. Do you get that? Like there's a little bit of a governor, let's say, on the gas pedal. So the gas pedal is going down, but part of that, imagine you're sending a gas pedal, you press on the gas pedal, so the gas is going to the engine, but there's one little pipe connected to that that's also going to the brake, and it's activating the brake. So the more you press on the gas, the more gas is also going to that brake. So it limits the ability for us to be too hungry. I find that really, really interesting, that these mechanisms be crossed like that. So here's what you get: NPY, AGPRP, and GABA being released by the hunger drive part of the hypothalamus. And then you have melanocortin being released by the satiety, satiety. I don't like that word, but satiation motive. Melanocortin being sent to the paraventricular nucleus, all within the hypothalamus. We're still in the hypothalamus, and that's where we kind of make this decision. And those go off to determine the degree to which we feel, and we see that in that two kinds of neurons, the lateral nucleus of the hypothalamus and the output area in the cerebral cortex, to talk about, okay, it's leaning toward hunger, let's go get something to eat. And we get into that multicultural viewpoint of, how do we actually satisfy what we eat here. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you, I have a little project that sort of has evolved from this discussion that I had today with my family, because we were talking about Thanksgiving and how we experience a meal. Let's say a highly anticipated meal like Thanksgiving. So we might prepare there's if do both of you celebrate Thanksgiving? Is this okay? So we're in the same cultural basket, and so do you have traditional meal? Do you have turkey, the fixings, and all that stuff? Okay, so those things, those combinations of foods. What I would like you to do is talk about your Thanksgiving meal and how it gets represented in these signal places. Now, talk about how, what role does food deprivation play on? And if you think about the traditions such as, don't eat that, it's going to ruin your dinner, is part of ruining your dinner is you're going to address some of your food deprivation. Isn't it better to kind of like put off eating because I'm waiting for the turkey, kind of thing. There's a little bit of food deprivation going on that we might have a really light breakfast because we're going to gorge ourselves at night. We're going to go. So we may actively engage in food deprivation as part of the hunger and how that contributes to the hunger motive. Then we look at taste. And now, I don't know about you folks, but I know in our house, we use a slow cooker to do the turkey. The freaking house smells like a turkey the whole day. So you're sensing that. Then there's the breads that are being cooked, and then the vegetables, and all of these sensations way before you're going to eat. What effect does that have? You can talk about that. Body fat, that's just where we are, and we can see where that's sort of a balancing thing. And this, I guess, as a little side note, this is sort of our what dietitians will refer to as our set point. Have you ever heard that term before? A set point is your what they would consider your ideal. What your brain considers as your ideal weight. Now, one of the problems associated with overeating, which can result from a misbalance between these is overeating, is that we can within the brain we can actually locate our set point higher than it is healthy for our body. That makes it nearly impossible to lose weight because the very brain itself is fighting against you. If the brain thinks that your set point is here because you've been overeating for a very long time, so your new set point is here, the process by which you need to go through to bring that set point down is actually a long-term, very, very arduous process, probably best done with a nutritionist. And that's why most diets fail, because the set point has been there for a long time. We tend to not address our issues until much later. And so we might have an issue with gaining weight, but we don't really address it until maybe it's too late. See, I'm a poet as well. And so we've already established a new set point, and that's kind of what that body fat thing is doing. It's like, where's your ideal? And maybe some people inadvertently are getting too many I'm hunger signals when they have plenty of body fat. And so because the set point's off. Now, of course, when we eat and we start metabolizing that and our pancreas gets involved in helping us digest the sugars that are there, that's sending signals saying, yeah, we're getting it. This is it. You're doing a good job. We're experiencing that energy. We're experiencing all of that. So that's where the insulin comes in. Think about your Thanksgiving meal. Think about the distension of your stomach. We all have that, right? I have to tell you a really funny story. Did any of you ever meet Wendy St. Pierre? She was the mental health instructor at KVCC for a while. Anyway, while she was here, we went to a conference together out in Texas. And we went to Texas is, of course, famous for its barbecues, and rightfully so. So we went out to this hole in the wall, which is a grill the size of my office. No kidding. They had like 7-foot spatulas flipping stuff. I mean, it was just, this is on a scale unknown, you know, it's just Texas size. And you get your food on paper. It was just, it was pretty amazing experience. Anyway, one of the things that we noticed that was kind of funny was the outside, you know, there was no indoor seating, it was under a tent course sort of thing. Almost like the way we experience true lobster eating. You don't eat lobster in a restaurant, you eat lobster on a picnic table, right? So you can just like let the butter go everywhere and, or let the soda that I just let go everywhere. So we're in this Texas restaurant, and the seats of the picnic tables are literally 2 feet away from the table. Like I had to like lean, like if I'm sitting on the bench, and we joked that this is to accommodate the distended bellies, you know, that you eventually get. You can't sit there until, you know, you have to have room between you and the table. And so I actually did just spill my soda. So just like a minute, I got to wipe up my table here. So hold on. Live television. Great. If I suddenly light up and go silent, it's because it spilled all over my power cable. I think I'll be fine. Okay. Good enough. Okay, so the distended belly. Think about the distended belly experience at Thanksgiving and how we pay attention to it or how we ignore it. And I might, just to throw some hints in there, as you're, and this is certainly some dialogue that we got into today. I keep referring to that conversation I had with my daughter and my wife, and it was, you're sitting there and your stomach is saying you're full, but it smells so good. So you can actually experience your poor hypothalamus trying to deal with this, while part of your body is saying, Jordan, that's it. Your stomach is full. And then there's another part of you up in your nose that are saying, smell them biscuits. And you're just like, you know, you want it. So you're experiencing that double whammy. Now, I'm going to challenge you. And I'm not going to, because here's my plan. I told you, I think I might have, at least I meant to tell you I have a plan. I'm going to do a video on this for my Psychobabble YouTube channel. Why dessert is important at Thanksgiving. Now I want you to locate on here. Can anybody tell me where dessert comes in on this? Now look at the signals. Look at the signals all over. Where would dessert come in?
Is it where it says it increases persistence and reward of eating?
Where's
Maybe
that?
I'm wrong.
No, that's way after. That's after the whole thing. And I'm asking you to look at the inputs, just the stuff on the left. What do you think is the area that is most impacted by the pumpkin pie? You eat some pumpkin pie, and what do you think is the thing that gets most activated?
Insulin.
What's that?
Insulin. I think we both had at the same time.
That's going to be a little later in the day. Remember, that's a balancing one too. I didn't point that out. It has a red arrow and it has a green arrow. Insulin's going to be a late. We don't get that until a little bit later when we have that kind of like I've eaten sort of thing. It's not while we're eating, but something else happens when we have dessert, because dessert is full of what?
Sugar.
Where's sugar?
Oh, yeah.
Glucose, the short-term signal.
Oh.
And what part of the motive cycle does it point to? Green or red?
Green.
It points to green, right? So dessert has an effect on how hungry you are. Now, so I'm going to challenge you. So there's a question in the quiz. I'm going to stop right here on this part. Let me go to the quiz. The second question. Thanksgiving is an American holiday that is usually associated with eating too much. Using the graphic, I've fixed these in the next edition, by the way, as I was preparing for today. There's like spelling mistakes all over this chapter. Using the graphic called The Brain and Hunger, which is what we just looked at, describe the competing components of this type of meal that may lead to eating too much. We kind of already had that discussion. I want you to include in that, in fact, I'd like you to see it, I'd like the focus of that question, just because we can talk about this, and is to include why, as I will describe in my video, it might be very important to have that pumpkin pie at the end. Why might that tradition of having a nice, sweet something like pumpkin pie, or my personal favorite, raspberry pie, why is it important to have that at the end of the meal? And I think that now when we think about traditions, we kind of make the assumption that maybe intuitively we knew what we were doing back then, and maybe it was a good thing to have a dessert at the end. And why? Why would that be a good thing in terms of this cycle, in relation to the fact that we have a tradition of eating too much on this day? How might having a dessert impact that? I've given you a lot of information there, so I want you to include that in your answer. So I want you to do what we just kind of did, is to talk about the meal, talk about your Thanksgiving, and how it touches on all of these pieces, all of these inputs. Okay? And I want you to at least describe, well, this happens and it activates the hunger. This happens and it activates satiation. That's as far as you need to go in that graphic. You don't have to go any further than that in terms of the brain activation. But talk about the different aspects. But I want you to include dessert. What role does dessert have in that whole process, and speculate why it might be a good thing to have desserts. The other question in the quiz has to do with what I was talking about in salty drinks, and going into that. And then, of course, the discussion is any sort of aspect, any sort of unhealthy relationship we have with food, whether we obsess about it, we eat too much of it, eat too little of it, we're too worried about this or that, following fad diets, anything like that. Let's have a discussion about that. And maybe looking at how the media might encourage an over fascination with food. I know it's interesting because part of the discussion I was having with my daughter, very intelligent young lady, and she reads up on other stuff all the time. And oh my, she has like, well, you got to eat this or do this, or like you have to mix apple cider vinegar with sugar and use that in your hair, and it makes your hair, all of these natural remedies and stuff like that. She's very, very into that, she's currently vegan, unless we have something really good, and then she's not vegan anymore. So she's, that there's so much information out there about this thing that we've been doing for eons called eating. And yet we still don't seem to be, as a nation, we're the healthiest any nation has ever been in history. There's no doubt about that. Even with all the stuff going on, we have stronger bodies, we have longer lifespans. I mean, all of that stuff. But we do have a problem with obesity. And so anything that might be in the media, just having a discussion about that, maybe look up a couple things and say, here's this another example of why we're supposed to be obsessed around food or body type or anything like that, to get into that. So, so I'm adding a little bit to that second question, just because it's the 2 of us, 3 of us, 4 of us, however many there are, to answer that question and add that dessert component. And I'm going to follow that up with a video, and I'll post the video actually. So I'd like to see if you can get this done rather quickly. And then, what did you come up with? And then, kind of what am I saying in that video? I think we might come to the same conclusions as to why that raspberry pie is so good. Okay, does anybody have any questions about?
I've a question, but it's not for biopsych.
Okay, let's hold off on that for a second. How about you, Jordan? Anything about biopsych? You good?